Good evening or good morning, everyone. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. I am really honored and delighted to present and moderate today this beautiful event in homage to our great Moroccan and international intellectual icon, Fatima Mirnici. It has been now since 5 years since she left us. But her memory, her legacy, and her intellectual spirits are still here and seem more present than yesterday, and I would say more necessarily than ever. I would like first to thank Professor Iman Lashkar, Fatima Mirnici chairholder at the Free University of Brussels, VUB, who had the excellent idea to propose the joint commemoration of this important event. I would also like to thank Dr. Alberto Carrera, coordinator of the Humanities Chairs at the UNAM University of Mexico, who was so enthusiastic and happy to join and cooperate with us. I finally would like to thank all the different teams of each university, of course the speakers, and also Jack Berg Center of Rabat for their valuable contribution and cooperation with the which made this dream reality and launched new perspectives for a great mutual and future partnership. So this commemoration bringing together 3 chairs bearing the name of Fatima Mirnici in 3 different continents, Latin America, Europe, and North Africa, I think represents an outstanding and symbolic meaning which reflects the resonance and universality of this amazing thinker. The topic of this commemoration and launching of our partnership with these 3 chairs is Rethinking the Decolonial, which is definitely in line with the deep intellectual work of Fatima Mirnici, despite the fact that she never named it as decolonial. But this subtle link with decolonial philosophy exists almost everywhere in her writings, and especially within some of her favorite and so famous concepts, such as that of hudud, as a borders, limit, or restriction. She was against all forms of hudud as material or intellectual restrictions, whatever their origin can be. And in all her life, she was struggling against the both sides of the same hudud, that of the traditional patriarchy and those of the hegemonic Western ideology, which subjected the world to its geostrategic borders, as she said many times in her writing. And yes, indeed, the journey of Fatima Mirnici is the journey of a double liberation from these 2 kinds of hudud. And rethinking the decolonial today, while we commemorate her death anniversary, it means to remain working and questioning what can the decolonial has to offer to us as a new perspectives in our world today, steeped in its deep uncertainty. So yes, her spirit totally without border, bila hudud, is once again extraordinarily present today. It's present today through these 3 chairs created on 3 different continents and challenging all the structural borders once again. So let me start now the program with the presentation of these 3 Fatima Mirnici chairs. So we will start with Fatima Mirnici chair of UNAM, Mexico, with Professor Alejandra Tapia. She's researcher at the UNAM Center for Gender Studies. Professor Alejandra Tapia, bienvenida. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, the Fatima Mirnici Chair was established at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, in 2017 as a result of a fruitful exchange with the Mohammed V University in Rabat. For our university, one of the objectives of this exchange is to study Fatima Mirnici, one of the finest Moroccan writers, intellectuals, and activists. Fatima Mirnici is highly regarded by our university because of her reformist thinking, her intellectual mobility, and her interdisciplinarity, her Quranic studies, and her dealing with Islamic feminism, both as a theory and as a social project, in light of changing dynamics and political context. Because she always fostered dialogue among cultures and democracies worldwide, Mirnici is one of the most eloquent voices in contemporary Arab societies, and one of the most influential thinkers of 20th and 21st centuries. Naturally, our chair is and will be devoted to teach and reflect upon her legacy. For their part, our colleagues in the University Mohammed V in Rabat will study one of the most outstanding philosophers of Mexico, Graciela Hierro, who introduced feminist ethics as the basis of female education and established gender studies in our institution almost 2 decades ago. Moreover, this chair also arises from our growing interest in the current affairs of North African and Middle Eastern societies. In this sense, at UNAM, it is of utmost importance to fully acknowledge the cultural and political importance of these societies. Thus, our aim is to conduct research, identify analogous realities between Latin American and Arab societies, and spread this knowledge for us to improve in terms of justice, human rights, equality, and freedom. Since currently feminist movements have gained great momentum in Latin America, and particularly among the students and academics in our university, we also seek actively to strengthen a human conception of women in order to further consolidate and mainstream gender equality inside and outside our institution. I would like to add that we are undertaking this mission through a variety of seminars, courses, lectures, and reading clubs. We are deeply committed to both conveying the importance of Fatima Mirnici's work and developing decolonial epistemologies, methodologies, and practices. Last year, Dr. Mustafa Ausir, head of the Department of Spanish and coordinator of the master's degree in Latin America at the University Mohammed V in Rabat, gave the lecture Human Rights from a Gender Perspective, the consolidation of achievements in the Moroccan experience. Besides, 2 conference tables were carried out, the first one on Fatima Mirnici and Graciela Hierro's work and thinking, and a second one on human rights and both Moroccan and Mexican women. At the beginning of 2020, the University Program of African and Asian Studies in our university organized several discussion groups on gender in Asia and Africa within the framework of the Fatima Mirnici Chair. Dr. Sara Sevchovich, researcher of the Social Research Institute of UNAM, gave the keynote speech, Fatima Mirnici, a Thinker. Lastly, in a reading club on literature and gender, organized by the University Program of African and Asian Studies and the Center for Gender Studies and Research, we studied Mirnici's novel, Dreams of Trespass, Tales of a Harem Girlhood, along with Dr. Moises Garduño, researcher of the Political Science Department of UNAM. These activities have been very rewarding to our community and surely have heightened our sensitivity regarding other cultures that seem distant but are actually very close to us. Thank you very much. We are very grateful for this invitation.
Thank you so much, Alejandra, for your presentation. I now give the floor to our friend and colleague. So, Iman, I will give you the floor. Iman is she's holder of the Fatima Mirnici Chair at the VUB, Brussels, whom I thank once again for her great idea to organize this joint commemoration. Go ahead, Iman.
Hello, everyone. I'm very grateful that we are here tonight together with the three chairs and, of course, two phenomenal decolonial thinkers. I've just showed, I'm now showing the presentation that I have. As you can see, the Fatima Mirnici Chair at the VUB in Brussels, the Free University of Brussels, was created in 2017. The co-founders, by co-founders Saïda Sakali and Jamila Idrissi. These are two Moroccan-Belgian alumni of the Free University of Brussels, and who in 2015, when Fatima Mirnici passed away, came back to their alma mater to ask the university hierarchy to launch, to create a Fatima Mirnici Chair, or to create a Fatima Mirnici Prize to honor her legacy and to further develop her thinking. So in 2017, the chair was launched with me as a chairholder as a tribute to the work of Muslim feminist and sociologist Fatima Mirnici. The chair promotes critical thinking, non-hegemonic intellectual traditions, interdisciplinary research, inclusive and pluriversal education, and a strong decolonial practice. And that's why the chair is very much involved in social services on topics related to power, gender, and Islam. So the Fatima Mirnici Chair is active in three areas, like probably most the two other chairs also, as we've exchanged. Of course, research and research activities are central in the chair. We organize reading groups. We organize, we publish. We put new research questions on the agenda. We have master students encouraged to work on the connection between Islam, gender, and power, so that they can involve in predoctoral trajectories on these themes, and then pursue further doctoral trajectories. A second element is education. It's very important. We are very happy that we were able to create a course on Islam and gender, which is part of an inter-university master's degree on gender and diversity. And we are still very much looking to create a more broader program on critical race and decolonial studies. A third terrain in which we are active and we try to be very co-creative and very participatory is in terms of internal and external services. Internally, we are very much involved in making the university an inclusive space. It's very important. We are very involved with the equality team, but we also try to collaborate on really a decolonization of the university. We recently also established an inter-university network that tackles racism, sexism, and elitism in knowledge institutions in Belgium. Externally, we organize public activities with strong collaboration and cooperation of civil society in Brussels, but now also more and more in other metropolitan cities in Belgium. What we've done since 2017 is, in terms of really a red line, or is a yearly program with outreach events on the theme of Islam, gender, and power. This is something that we've tried to do with external funding, so we're very grateful for ministers of culture and equal opportunities to help us, but also, and to support this initiative, but also Darna, which is a Flemish Moroccan house in Brussels, who is very much involved in dialogue around these themes. So we've developed three important and I think very valuable programs since 2017. One was, the first one in 2017 was Islam the City, in which we explored different themes, the Muslim femininities, Muslim youngsters, Muslim masculinities, and each year we end our program with a special tribute, like this year, to Fatima Mirnici. In our second year, 2018, we were inspired by Fatima Mirnici's Caravan Civic, and we launched the book caravan, in which we went to different spaces in Brussels to exchange with youngsters on through literary sources. So we discussed Fatima Mirnici's books, but also books of other Belgian Moroccan writers like Nadia Dalla and Rachida Lamrabet. Again, ending that year with a special tribute to Fatima Mirnici. In 2019, we, again, inspired by Fatima Mirnici's book, Forgotten Queens, we explored different exclusion mechanisms in different domains of the society, in the judiciary, but also the university. And so we have had really a very fruitful dialogue with different Belgian intellectuals, activists on a decolonial university, but also with Esma Lamrabet and other people on discriminatory laws in the MENA region, and also in Europe against Muslim women. This year, in 2020, again influenced by the artistic take of Fatima Mirnici, we created a program on films, Aflamna, our films in Arabic, on gender and sexual diversity in films that are created in the MENA region, are directed in the MENA region. But because of COVID, we had to cancel them, but we are rescheduling them again in 2021. But in full lockdown, we have created a series on critical Muslim scholarship in collaboration with the University of Ghent and KU Leuven and a Brussels theatre collective, Ras El Hanout. Finally, we are now also finishing a few sessions, 5 in particular, women talks with a local NGO safe space on feminism, racism and solidarity. What we want to do now is, in fact, enlarge our very local-based and Belgian-based network towards the other Fatima Mirnici chairs. So we really hope to create in 2021-22 an international program and network on decoloniality, Islam and gender. And we are organizing this event not to offer you and to present you already like a fixed program, but we would like to call for your participation. So please do use the Q&A to inform us about, which decolonial practices you are involved in, or which decolonial research themes you are involved with, so we can all build these coalitions with different people around the world in order to further our knowledge, our decolonial knowledge and practice. I am so grateful that we are here with also so many people over all the whole world present tonight, and I really hope that I can see a reflection of your work, of your interest, also in the Q&A, so we can build further upon this information and upon this gathering. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Iman. It was very interesting, and this idea of international decolonial, great, inshallah. So, Dries, are you ready now?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So I give you the floor. I repeat, Dries is coordinator of the Fatima Mirnici chair, which is held by Rabat Mohammed V University and HEM. And as I said, he is our chef d'orchestre. And so please, Dries, you have the floor.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry I didn't manage to download my presentation, so I will do without. Dear colleagues and dear participants, I'm particularly glad on behalf of all the members of Rabat Fatima Mirnici chair. Glad because this evening we're talking about, I'm talking about after my mates, coordinators of Fatima Mirnici chair at Mexico and Brussels. Let me introduce to you briefly our chair, and which was founded by Dr. Mukhtar Al-Harras and myself, but initiated actually with Asma Al-Murabat. This is actually like, I would say, let's say the tale of a phoenix. Less than 1 year after her demise, Fatima Mirnici saw her chair created, hosted by 2 national academic institutions, anchored at Mohammed V University premises, and virtually acknowledgeable at Economia Hashem Research Center website. But most of all, more than 15 scholars, artists, civil society actors were convening and ready to give a new birth to her intuitions, take further her innovative sense of wit and criticism towards 4 areas at least. 1, gender equality and democracy. 2nd, media and culture. 3rd, real economy. 4, globalization, youth, and local dynamics. If we managed in the 2nd symposium to deepen and share about social sciences in the Arab world, we were all along, as she would, wary to encourage youth initiatives, participation and creativity. Thanks to UNESCO and its founders' support, we launched in 2018 the Hudud project, which stemmed from Fatima Mirnici's metaphor of frontier limits that women go beyond through imagination. Actually, young artists and researchers were invited to cross their imaginary and investigative skills. Most of them went beyond our expectations, and the creative projects born from their journey with mentors are still 2 years later blossoming. Of course, the chair cannot be an esoteric space, nor even an exclusively academic endeavor. The launch of Fatima Mirnici literary cafes at the beginning of 2019 allowed us, through debates open to general public, to disseminate, as Fatima Mirnici would have loved, to creative, critical, and pragmatic issues like Islam and feminism, like the situation of medical professionals during the lockdown. Of course, when the pandemic started, we had to live up to her own and our expectations. And that's why because we were all hankering for democracy and better collective well-being, we launched with a great deal of collective intelligence, a critical project making a parallel between the harem and the confinements. And with this, we invited in chairs members and their connected circles to think critically about Fatima Mirnici's concepts, like Eight de Bruy, Cowboy and Sinbad, and 6 other concepts. Actually, we took then the decision to take them further, not to reproduce them, but to reinvent them. This is the main spirit of Fatima Mirnici chair in Rabat, not to reproduce, not to conserve ideas, but to take them further, to rethink them in other ways. As from today, we are proud to start this ambitious, intellectual, and undoubtedly unprecedented tri-continental project about rethinking the decolonial. Fatima Mirnici didn't theorize on the issue, but you will hear it in a moment. She wrote with her sense of double critique, enlightening passages that could be of great interest to all of us, to our present and future contributors. Let me thank our two guests, Salwa Lust-Bulbina and Ramon Grofugel, for being the first to open the floor for this exciting adventure around rethinking the colonial. Thank you all for being among us tonight. Asma, the floor is yours again.
Thank you. I have a problem with the... Is it okay? Okay. So I was saying, let us now enjoy a special and spiritual moment with our friend and great and so stunning Moroccan actress Sofia Hadi, who will read to us a beautiful, very beautiful text from Fatima Mirnici book, Shahrazad Goes West. Sofia, the floor is yours. Please.
Shahrazad's first trip to the West was made in the company of a French scholar, Antoine Gallo, an art collector who traveled to the Orient as secretary to the French ambassador. Gallo was the first translator of the 1001 Nights. In 1704, at age 58, he became an instant success when he allowed Shahrazad to tell her stories in French, and he remained obsessed with translating her tales until his death in 1715. His 12 volumes took 13 years to publish, from 1704 until 1717, 2 of them posthumously. In the meantime, Shahrazad was achieving what the Muslims who had fought the Crusaders failed to do. She ravished the Christians, from devout Catholics to Protestants and the Greek Orthodox, using only words. Versions of Galland appeared in England, Germany, Italy, Holland, Denmark, Russia, and Belgium. The fact that the French translator took the liberty of cutting out suggestive scenes and wondrous descriptions of lovemaking and female anatomy, likely to shock his audience, probably helped. After all, sultans, viziers, women of Arabia or India had to express themselves as one would if living in Versailles and Marly. The subjugation of Christian souls by Shahrazad's tales was so satanically pervasive that ensuing translations and pseudo-translations, as scholar Hussein al-Haddawi calls them, reached a staggering number. By 1800s, there were more than 80 such collections, he writes. It was such hack versions that inflamed the imagination of Europe, of general readers and poets alike, from Pope to Wordsworth. Strangely enough, the intellectual Shahrazad was lost in all these translations, apparently because the Westerners were interested in only 2 things: adventure and sex. And the latter was expressed only in a bizarrely restricted form, confined to the language of the female body. Samar, the Arabic word for talking late into the night, was nowhere to be found in the Christian European tales. For an entire century, Westerners' interest in the 1001 Nights was limited to its male heroes, such as Sindibad, Aladdin, Ali Baba. Shahrazad had to wait until 1845 when Edgar Allan Poe published The 1002nd Tale of Shahrazad to be celebrated as the brainy master of storytelling. I was very happy when I first heard about Edgar Allan Poe's sensible treatment of Shahrazad and started looking for a copy of his book in Berlin bookstores. Poor Shahrazad had to cross the Atlantic, I thought, to find a man who would endow her with a developed intellect and describe her as a politic damsel. From 1704 to 1845, she had gotten helplessly stuck in Versailles and the French court's obsession with women's fashion. In this respect, her initial connection with translator Antoine Gallo had proven to be fatal to her reputation. Versailles ladies were Gallon's targeted audience. He even sought advice from duchesses and marquises before publishing his text, which was probably one of the reasons he felt obliged to expurgate the tales. One of the greatest fans of the Orient at that time was none other than the Marquise de Pompadour, and she was more interested in harem clothes and the harem's fashionable luxuries than in women's subversive trends. In 1745, soon after Louis XV established La Pompadour in Versailles as his official mistress, she hung in her bedroom 3 paintings of sultanes or harem queens by her protégé artist, Carl van Loo. All 3 were beautifully bejeweled, well coiffed, and draped in luxurious clothes. Thus, forever linking harem women with frivolity and extravagant superfluous trifles. And in 1778, on the eve of the French Revolution, Marie Antoinette herself appeared dressed as a sultan, which did not help one bit to restore poor Shahrazad's image as a political crusader fighting against despotic rule. Besides adventure and sensual luxury, sexually explicit talk was the third element of the 1001 Nights that entranced early Western readers accustomed to being squeezed between censorious priests and cold rationalist thinkers, such as Descartes. The translations opened up the gates to an Orient where sexuality was boldly explored by a female storyteller, forced to entertain a dangerous and sulky husband. This storyteller knew, centuries before the advent of satellite weirds who found sex, that the most efficient weapon with which to arouse a man is words. That is the main lesson taught in the story of the porter and the 3 ladies, which Shahrazad narrated to the king on their 28th night. Yet, though her storytelling represents one of the most pornographic choices she could have made, the key message is a political one. Even when Shahrazad chooses to speak in the register of pornography, she has a political message to convey. The story begins by describing the victim, a poor, hard-working man who is literally picked up by a rich woman. I heard, O happy king, starts Shahrazad, that once there lived in the city of Baghdad a bachelor who worked as a porter. One day, he was standing in the market leaning on his basket, when a woman approached him. With a soft voice and a sweet tone, she said to him, "Porter, take your basket and follow me." Hardly believing his ears, the porter took his basket and hurried behind her, saying, "Oh, lucky day." In the Arabic text, the porter uses the word qubul for luck, and literally says, "How sexy I am today. Ya nahar al-qubul." Well, his self-flattering appreciation of the situation hardly prepares him to cope with what happens next. The lady instructs him to carry heavy jars of wine, loads of meats, bags of vegetables, and all sorts of dried fruits considered to be aphrodisiacs. Raisins, figs, almonds, hazelnuts, into a luxurious house that she shares with her two sisters. But once the job is done and the porter is paid a dinar for his services, he refuses to leave. "Give him another dinar," says one of the sisters, who's getting impatient. And that is when the porter reveals his intentions. Truly beautiful women need a man. But what the porter does not realize is that he will have to prove himself before the sisters will allow him to change his status from servant to sexual partner. After coldly reminding him that without gain, love is not worth a grain, the three ladies explain. Well, what can make a poor man sexy? This is the tough question that the porter has to face. And he works to convince his hostesses that his intellectual capacity and sensitivity make him a superior lover. And it is only after the porter has acknowledged that the giving and taking of sexual pleasure is a brainy task that the sisters allow him to join in the party. They start drinking wine and talking brilliantly into the night. Then the sister who first picked him up undresses and jumps into a lovely pool in the middle of the courtyard. Then she washed herself under her breasts, between her thighs, and inside her navel. Then she rushed out of the pool, sat naked in the porter's lap, and pointing to her slit, asked, "My lord and my love, what is this?" "Your womb," said he. "Oh, but you have no shame," she replied, slapping him on the neck. "Your vulva," said he. And the other sister pinched him, shouting, "Ah, this is an ugly word." And they went on, this one boxing him, that one slapping him, another hitting him. The torture stops only when the porter finally understands the rule of the game. It is foolish for a man to pretend to name what only a woman can control, her sex. For men to control what they cannot even adequately name is therefore pure delusion. This political dimension of the 1001 Nights, stressing female self-determination, explains why. It helps to explain why in the 80s and 90s, Egyptian fundamentalists repeatedly burned symbolic copies of the populist Arabic editions of the book, available in any Medina for a mere 60 dirhams, $6 for 2 volumes. And although no one knows how well the censored version of the 1001 Nights, which the fundamentalists then had printed, sold on the Egyptian market, what is certain is that in the Arab world, no one mistakes Shahrazad's descriptions of sex for trivial pornography. Which brings us back to our initial question. Why did the enlightened West, obsessed with democracy and human rights, discard Shahrazad's brainy sensuality and political message in their versions of the tales? Because when 200 years after Galland's translation, Shahrazad made a spectacular comeback in the 20th century, Europe agitated with all kinds of revolutions and progressive ideas, she was again held hostage, this time by two Russian artists. Diaghilev and Nijinsky both used her to celebrate the body as the sole source of sexual pleasure and achieved in modern Paris what Shahryar had failed to do in medieval Baghdad. They silenced the storyteller. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, dear Sophia. Beautiful performance as always. I think that this text perfectly sums up the decolonial perspective of Fatima Mirnici, describing how Shahrazad has been inured as a political female. The Arabic traditionalist vision and Western Orientalist vision. So now we are going to start with the second and important part of our program, and with our two exceptional international guests. The first presentation is held by Professor Ramon Grossfugel, who is sociologist, professor of ethnic studies at Berkeley University. He is an international eminent theorist of decolonial thinking, and by the way, my dearest brother. He will talk to us about decolonial feminism from Americas. Ramon, bienvenido.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Asma, my sister, from whom I learned a lot. And I want to thank the consortium of the three universities, the Open University from Belgium, the Mohammed V University from Morocco, and the UNAM from Mexico, for the invitation to be with all of you and for taking this initiative, this consortium having as the figure of Fatima Mirnici at the center. I find it very, very interesting, and that opens up a lot of possibilities for international collaboration, research, and thinking together. I think that, first of all, I would like to say that decoloniality involves a double critique. Okay, I think this is very important to keep in mind. Decoloniality involves a critique to the structures of domination of the West at a global scale, but also involves an internal critique of the people, subjects, nations that have been, in a sense, that have experienced the domination of the West through imperial colonial structures. So this internal critique is as important as the outer critique of the power structures. I always say that if you limit yourself to criticize the outer structures without dealing with the inner structures, then the decolonial critique becomes very problematic, because then you lose sight of other dimensions in the process of decolonization that are crucial for what we mean by decoloniality. For example, if you dedicate yourself to criticize the West, the outer structures as the West, and don't deal with the West inside us, I mean, I find it very problematic. And not only the West inside us, it's also an internal critique, not only about the West inside us, it's also about internal critique about those issues in our own traditions that become also problematic in terms of relations of domination. Okay, and I think Fatima Mirnici offered a very important contribution from the point of view of having a thorough critique of the problems of oppression inside the oppressed traditions. Okay, and if you look at her work, especially her work on the hadiths in Islam, in Islamic civilization, etc., and all the interpretations around it, patriarchal interpretations, I find her contribution as a very important contribution from the point of view of dealing with also inner structures of domination that we carry on into the present. So I just begin with that because there is, I would say, the wrong impression of thinking that decoloniality is about criticizing the outer structures of the system we live and losing sight of the subjectivity, identity of the inner structures that are also a part of the colonial world we live, as well as those aspects that we have inherited also from our own traditions from the past. So it's a double critique. And always, and someone like Enrique Dussel always emphasizes that decolonial thinkers are always looking at in both directions, both the critique to the structures of domination, but also the critiques that are related to ourselves, the inner structures, our own traditions, and also the West within us. Okay, so the West is not something. So when I say West and non-West, I'm not talking about geography anymore. I mean, maybe in the early period of colonization, you might say the West and the rest in a geographical term, like the West is over there, the non-West is over there. That's over. In the world we live today, there's no such a thing as the West over there and the non-West over there. In a sense, we are all inside a global planetary civilization, and we are all inside those structures that so the West and the non-West is not anymore a geography. The West and non-West is more a relation of domination. Okay, that's what the West and non-West refers to when we talk in the colonial language about the West and the non-West. We're talking about relations of domination, not so much of a geography. That means that there is a non-West inside the West, inside the geographical West, and there is a West inside the geographical non-West. So for me, this is not a geography, these are relations of domination. And so we need to look at it in terms of social relations rather than geographical definitions of this. Because if we look at it from a geographical point of view, then we lose sight or we get confused in the way we're talking about these things. And then we think of some kind of purity, external purity that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, because after 500 years of European colonial expansion, there's not a space in the world you can say is absolutely exterior to what we call today the West or the modern world. We are all inside it, and therefore, and it's also inside us, so we need to look at these things in a more complex way. And the second point I want to address is the issue about when we say decolonization, we need to know against what we are decolonizing. If we don't have a clarity about what we mean by these terms, colonialism, etc., then it usually makes no sense to talk about decolonization if we don't know against what we're decolonizing. Okay, so that's another topic we need to address. So, for example, when we use the term coloniality as opposed to colonialism, we use it as a way to call attention to the continuities of the structures of domination put forward by several centuries of European colonialism, that is European colonial administrations around the world, and how these structures of domination are with us today. You know, how a lot of these structures haven't been decolonized or haven't been fully decolonized. And so when we use the term coloniality, we're referring more about those continuities rather than, than reducing the term colonial domination to the presence of a colonial administration. So we tend to talk in a more broader sense about this question. So, for example, let me mention a few of these structures that we call attention to when we talk about decolonization. For example, most of the world today is, in a sense, to use this term, quote unquote, post-colonial, because there's most of the world today, with a few exceptions, are, in a sense, not anymore into a situation of colonial administration or the formal. Is more today, in any case, most of the world, especially in the periphery of the world economy, they are in formal independent states. Formal, I say formal because there's always a gap between the formality of the law, the formality of the juridical, political institutions of the state, and the realities of the political, economic, cultural, military structures of domination of the world. So I'm saying formal just to call attention to the fact that there's still a long way to go before we say the world has been decolonized, okay? Because in a way, we still carry on a lot of the structures of domination from colonial times to the present, even though today, most of the world is not anymore under a direct colonial administration. And so I'm saying this because sometimes these terms get confused in the conversation. So I'm trying to clarify what we mean by coloniality, decoloniality, colonialism, so we don't confuse these things. And so, so the colonial administration, of course, was very important for having coloniality today, because without several hundred years of colonial administrations around the world, a lot of the structures of domination of the world today won't be there today. You know, the reason why we are in a world that we still call attention to the fact that the world haven't been fully decolonized is because there are all these structures of domination that goes back to colonial times that are still with us, reformulated, reframed, with new forms, etc., but they're still with us. That's why the famous Pan-Africanist Kwame Nkrumah, leader of Ghana, used this term, coined this term that today we use as common sense in many circles, academic circles, the term NeoColonialism. NeoColonialism to refer to new forms of colonialism after the arrival to independence, after the end of colonial administrations. How it's not as if the relations of colonial domination disappeared, but that they were reformulated, updated, upgraded, you know, in what he neo-colonialism, new forms of colonialism. He's calling attention to those continuities and in time. And so what, in terms of examples, for example, the International Division of Labor that we have today of metropolitan centers, peripheral regions, there have been transformations of this over time, including today, but there is a lot of continuities going on within that structure that was put forward over several hundred years of colonialism in the world, that is of colonial administration, of the West organizing colonial administration around the world. One of those is the International Division of Labor, the capitalist world markets. And we can see the continuities within the discontinuities. That is, we can see that there's been discontinuities over time about this structure. It's not as if the structure of the International Division of Labor of the 16th century put forward by the European when they colonized the Americas is the same as today. It's been transformed, it's been reshaped, but pretty much the structure is there and is still with us, despite the fact that most of the world have overcome the colonial administrations, okay? So you still have countries that are subordinated in the International Division of Labor. You still have countries that are in a peripheral location that are still dominated economically by metropolitan centers. This is still something going on. It's not having disappeared. It's being reshaped. It's being upgraded. It's being transformed over time, but the structure itself is still there with us. Then we have also a structural domination in terms of some states, some countries, some metropolitan centers that have more power in the international arena than other countries in terms of decision making, you know, in terms of many of the world affairs. And this is, you could see some correlation there, although with significant changes over time too, but some correlation between all European imperial powers, you know, all Western imperial powers to include the USA, and the structures of metropolitan state, peripheral states in the world today. So you could see also at the level, not just of the economy, but also at the level of decision making in terms of the organization of interstate system, of the global interstate system. You still see those inequalities, those structures of domination going on today. Then you also see, for example, racist structures of domination, systemic racism, institutional racism also happening at a world scale. You see that also still with us, even though a lot of the origins of these ideologies and structures of domination at a racial level goes back to colonial times. And so you see a lot of continuities there too, despite the over time transformation, shift, emphasis, etc. But you still see strong continuities of the structures of racism, despite the fact that in most of the world colonial administrations are over, because now racism is something that we have internalized. I mean, it's something that we have internalized in our everywhere around the world, in our ideologies, in our ways of looking at the world, etc. We see the same thing at the level of epistemology, where we privilege Western epistemology, Western knowledge production over other traditions. And there you have something that we've been calling epistemic racism, sexism, you know, because you have there the articulation of the domination of especially Western men in knowledge production over other thinkers, you know, both male and female. And that's why I call it racist, sexist epistemology, because in a sense it inferiorizes the knowledge produced by women, including Western women, and the knowledge produced by the rest of humanity, you know, that we can call the non-West, quote unquote. I put it on quote because of reasons I already explained. But if Western magnified countries monopolize the legitimation of knowledge and the legitimation of an authority of knowledge at a world scale. So in you know, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, USA, Italy, you know, as the main countries that, if you look at the disciplines in Westernized university, we read fundamentally Western males of these 5 countries. You know, so there is a problem there in the Westernized university. The moment that's our only source of knowledge production in the discipline. I'm not saying we should not read them. I think we should read them, and there are important contributions coming from them. But it cannot be that that's our only source of knowledge. That's too. I call it a Eurocentric fundamentalism, when we are only reading Western male-fied countries and we don't open our archives of knowledge to epistemic diversity, you know? And so, but I'm going over all these things. I identify 16 hierarchies of domination in the global system. And I want to focus on one today. of the 16, I mentioned only 4 or 5, but I want to focus on the question of patriarchy, okay? Because that's the topic that I was asked to talk about. And what will decolonial feminists from the Americas are calling attention to? And so I refer here to the work of decolonial feminists in the Americas, both the Black feminist tradition, the Chicana tradition, and Latin American colonial tradition. So these are not, you know, these are my, in a sense, my interpretation, you know, of some of their contributions in relation to the colonial theory. One thing that I would like to call attention to is that the question, for example, of patriarchy, what got globalized at a world scale through the European colonial expansion. This is something I always emphasize, and this is something I myself have been calling attention to. It's not just patriarchy, because there are many forms of patriarchy in the world, okay? It's Christendom patriarchy. That's the one that the colonizer brought with them everywhere they went around the world. I mean, for obvious reasons. That Christendom patriarchy was the form they used to organize nation over women and alternative sexualities inside Europe at the time. And so when they went to colonize other lands, they brought this structure of domination with them and imposed it in many parts of the world. So there were places in the world, now we need to historicize this, because there were places in the world where there was a local form of patriarchy that was very different from Christendom, okay? From the Christendom form of patriarchy that have other logics of organization and domination, okay? Over women and over other sexualities, okay? So the patriarchal structure of domination of the West has its own logics, and they encounter in some places around the world, when they arrived, they encounter a form of patriarchy that was different from the form of patriarchy they were practicing. And so you have there multiple situations. One situation was to destroy the form of patriarchy they encountered and impose their own, okay? So there were regions in the world where this happened. There were other regions of the world where this did not happen, where the colonizers used the local form of patriarchy without destroying it as the way, as a tool of colonization in certain regions of the world. So you have, and then you have the hybridity between the local form of patriarchy that existed before the European arrival and the European Christendom form of patriarchy. And so you have some hybrid forms emerging from that encounter. There were other places where they simply did not try to transform the local form of patriarchy. They just use it in the process of colonization. So you need to see the variety of experiences, okay? In order, for a decolonial perspective, we cannot say just patriarchy. We need to put what type of patriarchy, because patriarchy is not, in a sense, a universal structure in the sense that it's the same everywhere. I mean, there were civilizations that have a form of patriarchy that was very different from the Christendom time. Now, what they share is a structure of domination over women, and it's, you know, the privilege of men over women, and the structure of domination over certain sexuality. In some form of patriarchy, like the Christendom one, there was a structure of domination over alternative sexualities, okay? And there was a heteronormativity imposed, okay? Now, there were other places where the patriarchy was fundamentally against women, but not necessarily touching the question about alternative sexualities. There were other places where you have more free encounter in terms of alternative sexualities, okay? So we need to look at this variety. This is very, very complex. And then we need to look also at situations where there was no patriarchy. For example, you look at the work of Oyeronke Oyewumi about West Africa, the invention of women. the Europeans arrived and they found no patriarchy there. There was no patriarchal relationships in that place. Or Silvia Marcos in Mesoamerica, that she had described how in what we call today indigenous people, or let's say the civilizations that existed there in Mesoamerica did not have patriarchy. That is, there was no domination of male over woman or over alternative sexualities or things like this. So there were also places in the world with a different configuration, okay, away from patriarchal structures, okay? So I'm saying this because in a decolonial perspective, we have to historicize these processes, you know, and not come with an a priori kind of understanding that, well, patriarchy is the same everywhere and there's been 5,000 years of patriarchy and that's it. It's more complex like that because there were places with other forms of patriarchy, like in
Ramon?
Yes.
I'm so sorry if you can finish because we don't have much time because Selwa have to do her talk. Okay, if you can conclude, please.
Yeah. So basically, to conclude, because there are many aspects of this, because I see, for example, the work of Fatima Mirnici as making an important contribution in terms of, for example, in certain parts of Islamic civilization, you have a traditional patriarchy different from the Christendom patriarchy. And the work of Fatima Mirnici is a critical work over those forms of patriarchy that were inherited from the traditional Islamic civilization. For example, the patriarchal readings of the hadiths, you know, you could see that very clearly in her work, how she deconstruct those texts and show the patriarchal readings that were put forward in the interpretation of hadiths. And, you know, so in that sense, to summarize, I just want to say that there are many aspects I didn't cover now about the question of decolonial feminism, but which, for example, covers the question, the relationship between race and gender, the relationship between modernity and colonialism. I haven't covered that, but just in terms of what I just spoke about, we need to historicize these things. And the work of Fatima Mirnici is a great contribution for a critique, internal critique to traditions that were patriarchal, although of a different kind from the Christendom type, okay? So I will stop here and maybe in the discussion we can elaborate more.
Thank you so much, Ramon. Thank you. I'm sorry for it's very interesting, but we don't have time. So I call Professor Selwa Luz Bulbina, who is a philosopher, former program director at the International College of Philosophy and specialist in post-colonial studies, living right now in New Caledonia. She will talk about, I think, because I don't have the title, but I think that it's about the concept of decolonization, not decolonial, the concept of decolonization from the perspective of an Algerian, African woman and thinker. Selwa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this, for your invitation. I'm very glad to share with you this early morning in Nouméa, New Caledonia. So please let me introduce myself in a few words. It's a way for you to better understand how philosophical thought is entangled with experience. On the one hand, I spent the first time of my life in Algiers, when Algeria was, as one says, the capital of revolutionaries. After living in Paris for decades, I recently, as Marc said, moved into Nouméa, New Caledonia in South Pacific. Obviously, Paris is the capital, or a capital, the capital of a former colonizer's country. Now, I live in a non-independent country where native people have been put in reservations until 1946. On the other hand, I was trained as a philosopher, then I studied political science. At the same time, I read a lot of anthropology and immersed myself in literature and arts. Last but not least, in psychoanalysis. And I've read Fatima Mirnici when I was a student because I lived in Paris, but I came from Algeria. So decolonization. Sorry, I want to add something because these studies was a way to cross borders, and it was for me the first step of the decolonization of knowledge. Decolonization has been my main concern on 3 levels. First, as an Algerian and African as well. Second, as a woman. And third, as a thinker. That is why I have focused my research on former colonies instead of former metropolis. From my point of view, we should link decolonization to the formation in which it originates, the colony. In conceptual matters, there is nothing worse than generalities. They have served to impose a certain order on the world, neither free nor equal. How can we forget? Conceptualization must be simultaneously general and detailed. Now, I distinguish post-imperial countries and post-colonial countries. Post-imperial countries are the former European metropolis. Post-colonial countries are the former European colonies. The term decolonization continues to refer to a past, particularly among historians. Is decolonization a historical period? Every periodization of history is problematic. Decolonization is generally viewed as a period that begins either in 1945 with the end of World War II, or in 1955 with the Bandung Conference. This periodization is visibly Eurocentric. It focuses on the loss of colonies and the demise of colonial empires. This periodization is typically post-imperial. While the former metropolis has a past, the former colony has a future. Or maybe it's better, but I can't develop now, a devenir, as Deleuze has theorized the question of devenir. We should observe that what European historians view as an ending is what others, extra-European, consider a beginning. The meaning of decolonization will be deepened in the space between those who view it as a historical period and those others for whom it is a reconquering of their history or their destiny. This asymmetry manifests itself equally in time as it does in space. Before reflecting more on decolonization, the very idea of colonization should coalesce, because since decolonization makes sense in response to that idea. Colonization creates the colony itself. Colonization creates the colony, sorry, excuse me, sorry. And those... I'm sorry. Désolée.
Pardon. Sophia, est-ce que tu peux éteindre ton micro? Sophia Hadi. Sophia? Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. So, colonization creates the colony itself and those who are colonized, as well as colonizers, the colonist, and the colonial. The term colonization, still largely in use, unveils a singularity as it shows how colonization is unending. War never effaces itself in the face of peace, nor does the military in the face of what is civilian. The colonizers' work of transforming the country or the region is never completed. So long as indigenous people remain, this task can't be completed. This is particularly true when colonization is undertaken in the form of settlement. In the colonizer's eyes, the territory is never sufficiently colonized. It's always too foreign, too backward. For those who have been colonized, this is a forced migration. They will live under foreign law in a land no longer theirs. A foreign tongue will be forced on them because they are no longer at home. The country is always too colonized. Those who are colonized live or rather survive economically, socially, politically, culturally in a colony and occupied territory. And you know that an occupied territory means also occupied mind, an occupied mind. How many resistances or struggles have been undertaken to fight for the conservation of a piece of land, to safeguard riches, to preserve a way of life, and so on, within a given colony. The illusion that the colonizer's domination is total veils the fierceness of the struggle of those colonized. The idea of decolonization initially operates from this point of view. It is initially European. It comes into being at the counterpoint of the notion of colonization. The term decolonization is born not in the 20th century, as it often thought, but in the prior century. It is initially a political term. It is used as early in 1836, when the French journalist Henri Fonfrède writes about Algeria. His manifesto, The Decolonization of Algiers, depicts decolonization as an impossible and shameful effort, a ruinous folly that its partisans view as a point of honor. In his eyes, the greatness of the honor of a country is but smoke and mirrors. He recommends that the French settlers evacuate Algeria. Fonfrède's new word is then taken up among the anti-colonists, as well as those who opposed colonization and by the adversaries of colonists. But as imperial victories carry the day, the term decolonization falls into disuse. Decolonization is therefore initially an idea expressed by Europeans who constitute a political minority in their opposition to colonial expansion. It is at the outset a political idea that is correlative and contemporary to the idea of colonization. Colonization and decolonization are thus tightly matched. Almost a century after that initial usage, when the British, the Germans, the Portuguese, the French, and others have once again extended the reach of their power, this time in Africa, the notion of decolonization resurfaces elsewhere in a British colony, this time referring to struggles for independence. Indian communists are responsible for reintroducing this notion. In 1928, Manabendra Nath Roy writes, in Socialism and the Empire, the denial of the right of self-determination to India is dictated by the interest of British capitalism. This argument turns decolonization into a question of self-determination, which is pitted against national or imperial capitalism. In Europe, more or less at the same time, the German Julius Moritz Bonn uses the word Entkolonisierung to refer to the retreat of the imperial powers from their colonies. Then, as an immigrant to Great Britain, the word decolonization. In an article entitled Imperialism and published in 1932 in the Encyclopedia of Social Sciences, Bonn established the idea of decolonization. All over the world, a period of counter-colonization began, and decolonization is rapidly proceeding. In 1938, he published The Crumbling of Empire, the Disintegration of World Economy. There, he thinks of the dissolution of colonial empires as a disintegration of the global economy, a revolution. The French Algerian Frantz Fanon, when writing about Algeria, refers to an agenda for total disorder. In The Wretch of the Earth, he writes decolonization, which sets out to change the order of the world, is clearly an agenda for total disorder. From my perspective, decolonization consists again in mourning, in practice, not just a colony, but also a certain subject, a certain word, a certain order. The restless, traveling notion of decolonization thus underwent a double displacement. On the one hand, from the metropolis to the colony, and then from the colony to the metropolis. And on the other hand, from the political field to the academic. This is how the idea of decolonization becomes associated and then conflated with the dissolution of the European colonial empires in Asia and Africa, and the subsequent emergence of new independent states. Within the academic field, this idea continues to migrate toward critical thought. Decolonial thinkers have spent the last decades unraveling the intellectual, political, and structural legacies of colonialism and ongoing coloniality in our contemporary world, because they think that coloniality is not the same idea, as Ramon Grossfogel has developed this point before. It is not the same idea or the same reality than colonialism. The imperial ideology, for instance, did not disappear with independences. Quite the contrary. It perpetuated itself in the idea of underdevelopment, which immediately devalued the independences by turning them into victory that were a little consequence from the point of view of economic development. We should figure out that colonial frame or structure does not only exist on post-imperial countries, that does exist in post-colonial countries as well, but not in the same way. The concept of decolonization does not have, this is crucial, the same content in all situations. Although a general concept, it applies differently from the post-colonial lineage to America and to Africa. The states of the Americas are more similar to the European post-imperial countries, former metropolises, than to post-colonial African countries, former colonies. All over America, independent countries have been built on the metropolis paradigm. The Europeans have benefited of all the independencies in America, from the north to the south, except maybe in Haiti. In those countries, former slaves and indigenous people continue to be dominated by white people. Furthermore, Argentina, for example, organized an immigration policy to whiten its population. The same policy was applied in New Caledonia during the last 60s, all over Africa, except for in South Africa. Indigenous people have benefited of their independences. It is quite different. In the only modern settlement colony, Algeria, European people left quickly after its independence. So, America and Africa do not deal with the same situation. Thus, decolonization doesn't have the same significance in the both cases. It is clear that the situation of African countries is not comparable to that of the former colonies of the Americas, with the exception of South Africa. Furthermore, those who were colonized appear noticeably heterogeneous. To grasp fully the interlocked issues of decolonization, to disentangle them, and to know what decolonization might be, it is therefore best not to approach a matter only objectively, but also as a subjective phenomenon, and as one granting the status of subject and on an intersubjective plane as well. The question of reciprocity is not really a matter of person or individuals, still less peoples or populations, but first and most originally subjects. This is why it's so crucial to distinguish genders. The colonial violence has its counterpart in the Greek colonial lie that declares, "Be like us, and you will have what we have." The colony operates with a double standard. Women are both largely excluded from learning and supposed to be protected by their male fellow citizens. So they must be protected from their own. Firstly, by colonial men. It's a kind of Christian benevolence. Secondly, by post-imperial women, it's a question of white feminism. So wearing a veil does not necessarily signal regression, contrary to the prevailing assumption of Occidental people. Indeed, to refuse the injunction was synonymous with stupidity. The Freud of Irma's injection, which he recounts in the interpretation of dreams, considers Irma stupid because she did not accept his solution. She would be more intelligent if she followed his advice, because then, in opening her mouth, she would say about herself what Freud says about her. Sarah Kaufman has spoken about this proposal of the suspended tongue. Intelligence is supposed to consist in holding as a woman the views that the other would like one to hold, and in saying with one's own mouth what he or she would like to here. The veil issue reveals a libidinal policy, a manifestation of the will to power, a transaction more than a conflict between several protagonists: colonial European men, post-imperial women, post-colonial men, and last but not least, post-colonial women. Patriarchy abolishes property ownership over the body of others, the woman. Women's own bodies become simulacrum. Women were treated as a colonial living currency. It's a reference to Klosowski's work. At the end, masculinity and virility as one of the issues of veiling or unveiling women. The behavior of women seems derivative, as if women were suspended to the situation under constraint. That's not a conclusion, but a punchline. Fatima Mirnici told her misadventure in a Moroccan grocery store. She asked the grocer if women can be leaders of Muslims. Another customer answered this question, quoting a single hadith. Those who entrust their affairs to a woman will never know prosperity. It was the starting point of her inquiry about veil in Islam as a symbol of unjust male authority. She told also that in a deserty countryside, if by chance her aunts and other relatives did meet a male peasant along the way and he saw that they were unveiled, he would cover his head with the hood of his own djellaba to show that he was not looking. Some women create innovative tactics to deal with those restrictions, to cross over into the public sphere. Today, wearing a veil in a public space cannot be understood in the same way in every case. It could be cheap and effective way to do what you want, a formal guarantee of respectability. One of the most important issues here is to avoid projection from Western feminists, universalist claims, sometimes criticize ordinance as white feminism. On the other side, the established boundaries between a progressive West and backward world should be broken. This is not only a Western gaze, but a colonial legacy as well. Indeed, one of the deeper boundaries the former colonizers introduced in the former colonies was based on the difference between evolved people, les évolués, as European said in Algeria, for example, and backward people, les arriérés. But this distinction did not automatically disappear after independences. That internally distinguishes westernized bourgeois, well-educated women often veiled, and poor traditional or backward uneducated women often veiled or wearing scarf. Decolonization is an unending process. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Selwa, for this enlightening intervention. Thank you, both of you, for this great and deep intervention. I think that your 2 points of view, Ramon and Selwa, are somewhat different, even if basically you perhaps converge on the purpose and finality. So you have two different concepts, decoloniality and decolonization. But it would have been very interesting to make you both react but it will be for next time because we really have no time. And we need to open the debate for the question. So you can, I think that I now quickly open the debate for the question. I think I have two questions. The first one is about if there is a translation of the book 1001 Nights of Mirnici. I think that Dries want to answer, isn't that? Dries?
Yes, hello. Well, I actually, there are many translations. Some translation kept the erotic aspect of the text and others erased it. I invite you to read Abdelfattah Kilito's work, which is really the most knowledgeable and critical and fine literary critic of this question, because I wouldn't dare go beyond this very liminal remark.
There is another question, very interesting. Was Mirnici post-colonial or decolonial? So it's for both of you. Maybe Ramon, you can answer. Is for you, was Mirnici for you post-colonial or decolonial? Ramon? Your mic.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, there is a difference between decolonial and post-colonial. Okay. Yeah. One of the many discrepancies is that we believe in epistemic diversity. We try to put forward epistemic diversity in everything we're doing. What Boaventura Sosa Santos have called ecologies of knowledge. Everything we're researching, we try to bring ecologies of knowledge. If you look at the post-colonial, as good as many of their work is, and as great as many of their contributions are, they're very much centered in the Western male thinkers of the left in Europe, okay? And you don't see that much of epistemic diversity in their work. And so this is one of the discrepancies that I want to mention. So from the point of view of epistemic diversity, I will say that Mirnici is decolonial in the sense that she is bringing, different sources of critical thought within the, Muslim tradition, as well as doing an internal critique to the Islamic tradition, from the point of view of a critique to the patriarchal heritage, or as well as a critique to Western imperial domination, okay, in the region. So it's a double critique there. Now, maybe my discrepancy with Mirnici, that will be a subject for a future discussion, conversation, and clarification, is maybe that sometimes I would say that the way she characterizes modernity, that will be probably a topic for discussion and conversation. And we don't have the time to develop that here, but maybe the way she look at the question of modernity from the point of view of the colonial perspective might be emphasizing the emancipatory part or rhetoric of modernity and losing sight of the civilizational aspects of modernity. Modernity have this other side, the darker side of modernity, which is coloniality, that, and sometimes, but this is not just Mirnici, you could see that a lot in many of the North African thinkers that for whatever reason, historical reasons, they tend to look more at the question of modernity as an emancipatory discourse rather than looking at the darker side, which is the civilizational aspects of modernity that have to do with colonization. So this other aspect, I see it like I will have some kind of critique there that will be a good topic for another conversation.
Okay, thank you, Ramon. And for Selwa, do you think that Bennici had a post-colonial or decolonial vision or approach in her writings?
I don't know if I can answer your question, but what is very interesting for me in Fatima Mirnici is that she was on the backward side of the world, and she made something revolutionary at her time, at that time, to unveil some issues, and particularly in and now today with this Fatima Mirnici conference, the power of the fiction. The power of the fiction, I think it's very, very important for me to decolonize knowledge, because she crossed over the gap between fiction and theoretical thought. And I think that the first step of decolonization can be found in literature. Can be found in literature, because the literature can in the post-colonial or in colonial situation is the expression of the, how we can call the first person, the I, and not you, us, because us is a political term. It is not a term from fiction and literature. And on this way, the subjectivity, you know, can maybe disrupt or break something very important. It's exactly the case with Shahrazad. So.
Okay, I don't know if we have time, but I think that it's too late. So I'm sorry for the other question. And I think that we need other meeting to refine all this and this concept and develop the debate even more. So I believe and I hope that this will be part of the future program of the partnership between the three Fatima Mirnici chairs. So thank you, all of you. Thank you so much. We are going to end this event by thanking also our two keynote speakers. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you. Thanks to all the representatives of the Fatima Mirnici chairs, the public, but also the entire technical team without whom this event could not have taken place. So I don't know if this you want to add something, a last word maybe, Dries Sikkes?
Well, I mean, actually, I'm talking on behalf.
Or Iman also, or Iman or Alejandra. Huh?
Actually, I can talk on behalf of the hosts, the three chairs, if they allow me, just okay. To say that, and I am taking forward the call that Iman made just at the beginning for people. Please, this is a whole new adventure that we're starting. Yeah. We're not deciding by ourselves only what it will look like. this is a launching event. The rethinking the decolonial has to be rethought from different perspectives and from different areas of epistemology and from different imaginaries. Thank you, Selwa, for talking about fiction. Thank you, Ramon, for making all these distinctions that need much more time to be discussed. And that's why we'll take time now to think of a whole program that will give justice to epistemic injustice. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye-bye to all of you.